I've known Peter Hamilton for a long time. He's a great friend, and he's like one of the most knowledgeable and connected and respected figures, executives in the documentary business. He's a consultant, and he's also the publisher of a free newsletter that's really helpful for anyone wanting to understand the documentary business, and it's called Documentary Business. Although the URL doesn't say documentary business, it says documentary television, but that's a long story. Anyway, before we get going, Peter has about 15 slides that he teaches a course on Netflix and streaming. He's condensed that course into about 15 slides that he'll share with us today as kind of the structural backbone of this. But there'll be, I have a bunch of questions for him, and I'm sure you do too. So we'll save plenty of time for that. But Peter, just before we begin, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and also how you came to be a particular expert on Netflix to the point where you published a case study of their films and teach a course on it? How does one
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, Doug, first of all, it's great to be here. It's great to be your pal. Great to be a pal of the D word. And, the D word kind of likes me, I think works on the philosophy, you got to give before you get. And we try and have a big-hearted approach to the industry and to sharing our information and expertise. And that kind of pays back in ways that we don't really expect. So it's great to be here. Question then is, how come I became an expert in how come I became an expert in the industry? I was a teacher for a long time in Australia. I'm going to give you a short bio. I was a journalist before that in Indochina as a very young man during the Vietnam War, very involved in the anti-war movement and in teaching reform, and realized that creating films, particularly if they connected students to popular culture, was a real way of commanding respect in the classroom as distinct from teaching from 20-year-old textbooks. So I really became involved in the media as an effective means of social change. Came to the States, tried to replicate that career in the Reagan era, and that didn't work out too well. Finally found my way into CBS, where I worked in business development for their international department, but always had this focus on the documentary and news and documentary area. And then CBS kind of basically one day fired everybody at my level. And I realized that corporate life was inherently insecure, decided to set up my own consulting practice and specialize in the area I loved, which was the documentary, educational, a little bit of kids, a little bit of news. And I got really blessed by being hired by Discovery in their very early days. I think I was their second consultant. And I worked on business plan after business plan for Discovery, helping them develop their international networks, their home video at the time, their production studios, and so on. So I got deeper, and so my expertise really exploded as these cable and satellite channels expanded. And I worked for Food and Nat Geo and HGTV and so many others, and really understood the whole cycle between the business cycle, why programming is commissioned or purchased, and what value it adds to the business. And so that was a really fascinating period where there was just layers of data from Nielsen and so on, and we'll get into this in a minute. And then with the advent of streaming, there was a big impact. Netflix dominates, as you'll see in a minute. So my focus is to try and understand Netflix, but it's a non-Nielsen, non-ratings world. So, we've got to work from other cues. And it's just really tougher to decipher, what the streamers want versus back in the day, what the networks wanted. And So I hope that answers your question. It's just as the business has evolved, I've tried to evolve with it.
Right. Um, you know, we'll be talking about streaming and streamers, but we're focusing on Netflix because but I do want to distinguish at some point what makes Netflix different from all the other streamers, and what when we
Yep.
try and get our film on Netflix, we're probably also talking about all these other possible streamers as well. Why don't we go right into the
Yeah.
slides, and we'll as questions come up, I'll pop them to you.
Let's go. Yeah, there we go. Seeing the whole screen. Just by the way, my presentation is an adaptation of one I prepared for Show and Tell, which is a information and consulting and subscription service run by Keith Oshwat.
Yeah.
And so this is, I did this presentation a couple of weeks ago and adapted it for today. So we're talking about Netflix, and the streaming landscape, what they're buying, paying, and making. Let's go. Next slide. Listen, I put up Cannes because it makes me feel good whenever I see it. I'm going there in a couple of weeks for MIPCOM, and it actually, as it lifts my spirit, it's because when I'm in Cannes or when I'm in an event, I met Doug in Hot Docs in Toronto many years ago. Getting engaged in an event is absolutely critical for everybody in the field. I always say, if people say, what's the one message you would give to a hopeful documentary producer, an aspiring producer, I say, get out of Dodge, go join a community, join a market, join a festival, whatever you can afford. Anyway, next slide. I just think it's really important to understand the landscape in which your film as a producer is being pitched and hopefully commissioned or acquired. And just remember, going back to the beginning of the 1900s, when the documentary format was first developed through the Flaherty era at the 20s, it was a very specialty format. And then after the Second World War, very much the property of public broadcasters around the world, the BBC, and then it's, imitators and emulators country by country. But then in the early 1980s, you get two factors. You get the rise of home video, VHSs, and you also get the launch of these niche channels. So the broadcast model breaks down, and the niche channels are able to target particular demographics, women, males, people with particular interests, food, or just broad documentary topics. And so there was an explosion of commissioning for the business. And this curve is rising like a wave through the 90s. And that represents the total expenditure of the global community on documentary and unscripted programming. So each of these networks, Discovery, TLC, History, Food, they're buying for the States, their audience is expanding, and then they start to launch their international networks, and they're buying too, and then co-productions start to develop between them and public broadcasters like Discovery and PBS, and the public broadcasters themselves launch ancillary channels. So you get this incredible wave of expansion. And so in a way, that was the golden era of unscripted television. And then in like 2016, 2017, we started to see a big change. And I just wanted to reflect on one big factor. Each of these networks is buying for a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour schedule or some part of it. They had to fill their primetime programming or their daytime programming day after day, night after night. And so each of these networks is buying, between 200 and 800 hours of new programming a year. And you multiply that by the dozens of networks that launched in that period in the States and globally, you get a sense of scale. So Next, go to the next slide.
Peter, before you do, for one
Yeah,
second,
go.
I can't help but notice the curve goes down at
Yeah,
around
that's what we're getting
20%.
to.
Okay.
So I call this the breaking wave, because let's go to the next slide. So beginning in the teens, you get the or early in the what are they, the tens? I don't know. In that decade, you get the launch of streaming services, which provide you the opportunity to watch all you want, whenever you want it, in the most convenient form. And the audience starts shifting away from channels and their fixed schedules to streamers, and the streamers continue to expand their audience. You know, Netflix, you know, as we'll see, absolutely dominating this emerging market. And the reason why the wave breaks, and just remember, it's still enormous. It's still $1 billion, mega billion-dollar business. Netflix spends $17 billion a year, according to experts, on programming, of which a decent chunk, you know, a far minority chunk, but still a decent chunk, is on documentaries. But the reason why the wave breaks is that the streamers are able to be more selective about their programming buys. They only need to purchase enough to persuade the subscriber to either come on board to subscribe or to retain their subscription. They're not ratings driven buys. So whereas the channels, Discovery has to fill its prime time, has to target target its demographics, that's not the case with the streamers. So they're much more selective, and the mix of programs changes. So, you know, we see the rise of the super connected documentary with kind of A-lister producers and A-lister celebrity topics. And so there's a much narrower, there's a shrinking in the volume of purchases. And I would say that by and large, the cost of particularly their premium purchases, which we're going to see in a minute, goes through the roof. So still a huge network, but because the streamers are not commissioning for a schedule, and they're not commissioning for advertisers trying to meet particular demographics, there's a shrinking of the overall volume of spend, but it's still massive. Did you have a question about that, Doug, or have I taken you
Oh,
there?
no, that pretty much did it.
All right, next one. So, you know, just to show that, you know, streaming share of total TV viewing time, you know, continues to expand. It's a relentless expansion of viewing time versus cable and satellite and other formats. Let's go to the next slide.
Do you expect that to continue, Peter?
Yes, you know, it is continuing, and I mean, there are, you know, ripples. But yes, the answer is yes. And you can see here, you know, here's a better summary. Look at that number in the bottom right-hand corner. You know, just this year, between July 2021 and July 2022, we're talking US networks here. Traditional networks are losing viewers. Nearly 10% for broadcasters, nearly 9% for cable, and streaming is up 22%. So the traditional networks are losing viewers, ad revenues, and subscription fees to the streamers. The rate of loss is accelerating. So that means they're spending less on programming, and there are just so many cable and satellite channels that are, you know, documentary and unscripted channels. It means that they're spending much, much less than they were. In fact, many of them are just no longer, like Animal Planet, no longer actually commissioning originals. And so the channels spend is shrinking as they lose viewers and their financial model contracts. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, I really like this one. Um, a financial, I put in my newsletter, Documentary Business, which is free, and I recommend you all go and subscribe. I reported last week on a piece of analysis that a Wall Street analyst team did of the viewing of the top 10 programs during the entire summer of 2022, 3-month period. And Netflix has like 85%, just dominates viewing. And the others are Disney Plus and the other platforms have earned a fraction of the viewing of Netflix, to the point where, you know, Netflix is almost a quasi monopoly. And then the slide on the right actually shows the breakdown of total viewing in July 2022 across cable, broadcast. And you can see that Netflix has 8% share of all viewing. But if you look down that list on the right-hand side, Disney Plus only has 1.8%. Discovery and Paramount Plus and Peacock, they're all in that number up the top, all other. So they're not even registering at the 1% of total viewing. So you get another sense of the growing, or the share that streaming has of total viewing, and how much Netflix dominates that share, and in return how it dominates its, you know, streaming competitors. I saw a webinar this morning in which responded to the chairman, the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, the merged Discovery company, saying, we're not selling the company. So they've launched this Discovery Plus streamer. They've taken over HBO, CNN, and they're already worried about their financial future. They're just because they're just, you know, one of the factors is that they're just not cracking the audience and the subscribers that they'd hoped for. And that reflects back on Netflix's dominance. Next slide. You know, I think it's really interesting to say, as we look ahead, what are the financial resources that are available to the players in this new streaming market? You know, scale is just so important here. And, you know, Apple is a player, as particularly if you notice the recent award season. Alphabet owns YouTube. Amazon owns Prime. Look at the scale of those companies. And I know they're not dedicated media companies, but if they decide to play in a particular area, they have enormous financial resources, and this is the market cap. Even after the tech sell-off this year, these are just enormous the three on the left, trillion-dollar companies, and they can be very selective, but go really deep and spend big on their strategies. You know, and Disney, which is, as you know, is basically divided between you know, television/video and theme parks, is a much smaller company. Comcast is cable, you know, owner of NBC. And then you can see Netflix, you know, which is so dominant in terms of streaming viewing from a corporate point of view, working its way through its strategic issues, still is losing value in terms of how the market perceives it, but also doesn't have the scale potentially of its competitors.
Peter, a quick question. You know, looking at this chart, Apple seems to have multiple times the resources of Netflix, and we know they have a documentary division.
Yeah.
They're headed by Molly Thompson, and
Yep.
Matt there. Do you have any sense that they are going to expand? You know, I don't sense that they do a lot of documentaries, they just do big ones, and Beatles one, and a number of others. But Netflix puts out so many more. Do you see that shifting where Apple will start putting out more and more documentaries?
Yeah, I wrote about this a few months ago. That they recently greatly expanded their real estate and their office space and their staff, their management team in LA. So the expectation is that they're going to expand, and they're clearly doing a great job. They're winning awards and getting notice. Obviously they're not a pure video company. They're a phone company that has other interests. But this is an area that they see is absolutely critical for their brand and for their business as well. So they will expand. The second part of your question was that they seem to be affiliated. They seem to have focused very much on what I call super A-list producers and topics.
Yeah.
I think I noticed one the other day with Hillary and Chelsea Clinton were involved in executive producing. And I don't know about you, Doug, but if you went to meet Molly and Hillary was in town that day, you probably would be told to wait, So it's definitely
Likely.
a challenge for what I would call regular producers, even very seasoned ones that have multiple award winners. If they're not at that super A list of the Sussexes, the Obamas, the Clintons, look at all these folks that, you'd rather hope that they were satisfied with their accomplishments already, much less, commanding the attention of the buyers. But that's what the streamers are focusing on in order to get the visibility of their projects in the media, to get the buzz.
Well, once we're done with this kind of overview with the slides, I want to ask you all about how we then approach streamers as independent documentary filmmakers, and so I want a bit of time for that as well.
Good. So let's move on to the next slide. It's interesting. I just put this in because Netflix was the darling of the world about 12 months ago, but they've lost, I think, 2/3 of their market cap. That's the value of all of the stocks that are out there, and they're really feeling the pinch. They're still spending. It's kind of tricky. They still dominate the audience. They're still spending the streaming audience. They're spending $17 billion a year, which way outweighs their competitors. They are approaching profitability, whereas the other streamers are still investing, like heavily spending on content in order to build out their subscribers. So they're still in a really powerful position. However, because the market is hammering them, they are under pressure to reduce costs, to streamline. There's a big discussion right now about whether they're going to entertain more, co-productions and shared rights, whether they will buy more acquired versus originals. So clearly the pressure's there, and their model is under pressure, and it's evolving, and we'll get further into that in the presentation. But the point of this slide is to show that the market, along with many tech stocks, has really hammered Netflix, and they have to respond because they are a public company. Next slide. So let's move on to Netflix, and we're also talking about the other streamers, but we're focusing on Netflix as the market dominator, as I pointed out a couple of minutes ago. So there are basically three buckets: commissions, where they fully commissioned projects, own them worldwide. They have tended to pay like a 15% premium on the budget so that the producers don't have any back end at all. So they want all rights in perpetuity. They'll pay this premium, and that's the. They also have been fairly, let's call it, generous regarding the budgets in the first place for their commissions, but and that's really compensates the producers for their lack of back end. And then there are co-productions, and we're seeing examples of that where Netflix will co-produce, let's say, with a French broadcaster, and they will carve out French rights because of the contributions made by the French broadcaster, but Netflix will own the rest of the world. And they've been aggressive about these examples, but there's a lot of thought that a lot of discussion right now about whether this is a model that they'll have to expand. And finally, there's acquisitions, which is buying completed products, completed programs out of the library off the shelf.
Peter, can we talk a little bit about percentages of, I mean, I understand that Netflix isn't acquiring as many documentaries as they used to. At the beginning, they acquired a lot, and now it's much rarer. Can you get a sense of what percentage are these are commissions versus acquisitions?
Well, first of all, co-productions. Let's look at the middle one first. Very small percentage, right?
Yeah.
And boy, it's hard. I mean, clearly the model is that fully owned programs are the model that they have pursued, and they swung from a mix of acquisitions, and well, initially their model was on launch 100% acquisitions because they hadn't commissioned and delivered anything. They've increased their percentage of commissions, and I think I've got a slide. I think I've got a slide that addresses this in a second, to the point where let's have a look. Let's go ahead, and I think I might even have a number for you. Oh, yeah, there you go. Look at this. So you can see that the percentage of originals is increasing dramatically, although the definition of an original is still under question. Is an original a film that will be shown on Netflix, an acquired film that Netflix has the first window, or is it a fully owned all rights, all perpetuity?
Are they still
program?
doing that? Because I understand when they come, even if they acquire it, they want all rights in perpetuity from then on.
No, there are lots of many examples of acquisitions that are for a 3-year term, a 5-year term in particular. So they're not all rights in perpetuity.
Great.
So you can see that the percentage of originals is steadily rising, and the focus of their promotion obviously is on the originals. These are the high value programs. So let's move on to the next slide, unless you had another question about this.
No, I have a ton, but I want to wait till you do the overview. So
all right. So what are the budgets? And the budgets can be really huge in the overall streaming area. Look at the 30 million reported to be paid by Disney Plus for Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, 25 million for Billie Eilish. But they're 2 music projects, and when you look at the credits, this is just endless cascade of executive producers. So they're involved. They are music rights hold. They are the array, you know, the cascade of music rights holders that have so much leverage in a documentary about a musical icon, and all of those fees for the composition rights, the performance rights, other music rights are really expensive. So if you're looking at the Billie Eilish documentary, I would guess that the actual documentary producer, that their compensation was probably, you know, equivalent of $1 million, $1.25 million, $1.5 million an hour versus the entire, you know, budget for the film. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but that would be my takeaway.
We'll dig into the indie producers
Yeah, we're
section.
getting there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the celebrity, I would call it the, you know, the Sussexes, the Obamas, the Clintons, the Leonardo DiCaprios, you know, these production companies that are attached with, you know, highly promotable, you know, big names, you know, super A-listers. The budgets for those programs could be in the 2.5 to 5, you know, even 10 million, you know, an hour. And then the next level below that, I would call just regular producers, award-winning professional producers who aren't names on, you know, hot names that are on everybody's lips, that haven't won multiple Oscars, but still have produced hundreds of hours of programs. You know, I called around several of my friends this week, and their budgets are in the 750,000 to 1.25 million a year, unless there are particular archives that are involved, in which case the streamers themselves will have a separate budget item to pay for some exclusive musical or video archive. But the producers' fees are in that 750 to 1.25, sometimes less. But therefore, I would call industry leading, but not big name, not big award-winning producers. You know, it's very, 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 very solid. And then, you know, indie producers, aspiring producers, that's the challenge. That what we'll get into that, right?
Yes, we will.
Let's go on. How am I doing, by the way?
Very good. I'd actually like to speed up this part a little bit, Peter, because there's so many questions we have about approaching the streamers and things like that. So if we could.
All right. So we talked a little bit about co-productions and how, you know, under financial pressures, the networks, the streamers seem to be more open to sharing costs and rights, but there's a conflict there. All right, moving on. Acquisitions, you know, if you're a Sundance winner, that's one story. If you're not, that's another one. You know, Knock Down the House was a $10 million acquisition. I talked about the range of fees for established production companies. And then, you know, for independent producers, if the streamers are purchasing from the catalog, if it's a completed film that didn't win a top festival, I mean, really the answer is how long is a piece of string? You know, I've seen, you know, really competent films being acquired for 3 years by Netflix and the streamers for as low as 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, up to, you know, several 100,000. But that's the kind of range from buying from the catalog. They have tremendous leverage because there aren't so many buyers there. There are only the streamers and the channels. By and large, Discovery's moved out of the documentary area, except for Shark Week. A&E is still active, interestingly enough. Nat Geo is folded into Disney Plus. not a lot of competition. So for your completed film, it really depends on the sizzle, on the particular interest of the buyer at the streamer. But that is the range, you know, from bargain basement, this is the deal, take it or, you know, take it or leave it, through to, you know, low hundreds of thousands of dollars for a project that really has good reputation. Next slide.
That's it.
That's it.
That's it. Hey.
Q&A. You
All
asked
right.
me to hurry up. I was already there.
Thanks, Peter. Look, we have a pretty wide range of experience on these Zoom events with our members, everywhere from people making their first film to quite experienced filmmakers. So given that we are, you know, we most of us do not have like a litany of Academy Award winning films under our belt. What's the best way for us to approach Netflix? I mean, can we, getting a sales agent is one obvious route, but if we're, you know, if we can't get a sales agent to take us on and rep, or a really experienced producer who's worked with Netflix before, what's the best way to approach them, and when is the best time to approach them? And then we'll get into like how to approach them.
Yeah, no, what that's the $6 million question. Hey, listen, in terms of who's watching, I noticed that Peter Worsley's with us from the UK, a very estimable music producer and a good music specialist and a very good friend of ours. Hey, Peter. Back to the question, you know, the $1 million. It's the $1 million question.
6 million, Peter.
6 million. Yes, actually, if it's 30 million, if it's the Elton John special, the $30 million question. How does a regular producer? So, you know, if you don't have a reputation, but you have a reputation, and or put it this way, if you don't have a relationship with a buyer, whereby the Netflix buyer knows you well enough to take your pitch, that becomes a question, you know, how do you get in there? And I kind of see two options, principal options. One is to marry up with another production company that is well known to Netflix. So the marrying up strategy is really critical. But, you know, there are a lot of challenges with that. And I want to say, in terms of any hopeful producer working on their first film, if they are approaching any buyer, whether it's, you know, a relatively small cable channel like Reels, or whether it's Netflix, think of a comparable situation. As a friend of mine who was a buyer for Smithsonian said, this is a model that he shared with producers, that you're building a house in the suburbs of Washington. It's about $750,000 to build a house in a really solid middle-class neighborhood. And a guy comes to you, or a woman, a builder comes to you and says, you know, I've done a couple of sheds and I'd like to do your house for $750,000. You'd never hire the builder. You're going to hire someone who's done plenty of houses just like yours. And the same thing goes to hopeful producers. You are not going to get a commission based on a really brilliant idea and enter into a contract that's about 6 inches thick, you know, with a network or a streamer, unless you've delivered this kind of project before. So what do? You've got two options. As a principal option, as I said, is to marry up. But if you go to an existing producer who does have this relationship, they are the ones with the contractual responsibility. They legally will own the project unless there's some, you know, particular circumstances involved, and your leverage is not great, right? So you take your project to the established producers, they are going to take it into their development pipeline. They are going to begin to own the project editorially. And in any case, it's Netflix who are going to give direction on which way the project is realized. So your editorial control, your editorial influence is greatly diminished in this process. You do not have legal responsibility. Now, if you come to the table with really unique access, if you're going to be there when Elvis comes back from the dead and you have exclusive rights, you're going to have real you'll have real control over the project, you know. My friend Tom Porter, my friend Tom Jennings, who's a really estimable producer, he came up with a great quote the other day that if you pitched a show about that you had unique access to the return of Jesus Christ, and he'd be back on a particular day and you would be the only person there, the buyer might say, well, we're not doing religion that week, you know. So you never know. That was a digression. But the point is that if you work on the marry up model, you know, depending on your unique access to the story or to the archive or to whatever the underlying rights, you know, your leverage is greatly diminished.
You said there was a second way besides marrying up.
Right. And so the second way is to go through some kind of agent or intermediary. And I don't know of a single case where an agent has taken on an unknown first timer or, you know, second timer producer unless they have just a really incredibly powerful project. And so I just have no experience of newbies working successfully with agents. However, I want to go on to category this third party in this working through a third party. There's another category, and that's distributors. So most scaled up, decent size distribution companies are meeting with Netflix and the other streamers, and they have two types of product. They have programs that are in their catalog that they're selling. So they're completed documentaries or they're near completed documentaries that might require some finishing funding, right? So they are selling their catalog, projects to which they have the distribution rights, and they're pitching them to Netflix at the streamers. But while they're in that meeting, they also pitch original ideas that they have in development. Most, you know, decent scale distribution companies are also have a foot in the camp of production, and so during the pitches they can, you know, frequently pitch a concept that they have that's in development. And I know of, you know, several cases where that has been a successful approach.
So, you know, you make a strong case for going to some of these markets and festivals, particularly international ones like Hot Docs and IDFA, where, you know, instead of setting your sights on just meeting commissioning editors and who can give you funding, a big goal is to meet other producers who have these kinds of relationships and who can come on board. And I would, you know, throw out there that there are examples of partnerships with other producers where they don't have to have ownership of it. It's really what you negotiate among yourselves. They may come in as executive producers and have less of a hands-on relationship. They're busy doing their own projects. They help set up the deal. They provide oversight and all that, and make the Netflix and others feel better, you know, but that they don't own the copyright.
Well, copyright is one thing, but, you know, my experience is whoever has their name on the contract has enormous leverage, right?
Right.
That goes without saying.
I just don't want to make everybody suicidal here.
No.
Depressed is one thing, but suicidal is another. So
Well,
how,
yeah. Well, let me push myself back. Is that
yeah,
it really does depend on the relationship. You know,
right,
I said to there, if you do have a unique story, and if you have unique access, and if you have great characters, and there are real stakes, and you're at the center of this, and you meet with a production company that realizes that and embraces all of those strengths and wants to work collaboratively with you, then that's a desirable outcome, and that happens. So I didn't mean to be that negative, but I also need to really state that if whoever has their name on the contract has legal responsibility for the project.
so there was a executive at Netflix who didn't last there long, a Mr. Buñuel, who gave a kind of famous speech about the inner workings of Netflix, and
Mm-hmm.
it actually said that he does read email solicitations, that he gets 200 a day, but that it's not, he held out hope that it's not impossible to make direct contact with an exec at Netflix. Would you say that is possibly a slim possibility, but at least a possibility if you get to the right one and you write the right subject header that maybe entices them to look at your email?
I think it's very difficult. I think I was talking to a producer just the other day who went to a conference and happened to be I went from one conference event to the next, and they happened to have to share a cab with the Netflix buyer, and they were able to pitch, the project. That kind of happenstance where there's personal contact is infinitely more likely to happen than a email approach. And Netflix actually states that they don't take email pitches somewhere on their website. So I don't see any. I think you have to make personal contact with the buyers. They are listed. My Netflix 2022 study, which you can see, it's available on my website. We list who the Netflix personnel are in the States and worldwide. And I think you've got to study those people, study where they are through LinkedIn, figure out how you can possibly connect with them and make personal contact. But I really believe that an email, with an attachment and a trailer is very unlikely to get their attention.
So you find out what they look like, you stake out Netflix headquarters, you wait till they come out on their lunch break, you follow them to the food truck, and you make your pitch. What could be simpler?
Yeah, well, I think you're overstating it. But if you're at a conference, where they are, well, yeah, that, whoever is the hot buyer is going to be overwhelmed. I mean, I remember going to conferences back in the day, and the A&E or the history buyer used to walk down the corridor with his elbows out like that, pushing people away. And then when the BBC would come to a big event, people would pursue them too. And there was, so it's competitive, but everybody has to work out their own approach, how they're going to make personal contact with the buyers. It might be by submitting your film to a conference, like Knock Down the House and winning Sundance. Obviously the chances of that are very daunting because there are so many submissions there. Or it could be by getting press written about your film, by hiring a publicist who loves your topic so much that it gets written up in one of the major trades. And then, so there's another route in. But I just think that, you got to do what you got to do. But
Okay, so let's say you've done that and you've somehow managed to get a meeting with a pitch meeting with Netflix. Um, what, in your opinion, is sort of the best thing to show them? How long should your sample be? Do they really want to see pitch decks? Do they have the time? Um, what do you want to go in armed with? You may get a half hour, right?
or less. So you need for a project that's in development, you definitely need video, and the video needs to capture, the situation, the characters, the story, the stakes, your unique access, and no more than 3 minutes, absolutely, but a really sophisticated pitch trailer, and also a pitch deck, but short of a treatment. If they're interested, they'll ask you to share a treatment, and you either run away and write it, or you already have it on file. You already have that developed. But so you need a several page pitch deck, and there are samples of those on my Netflix course, and there are samples of them, obviously shared through the D-Word community, successful pitch decks, and then similarly with a trailer. And I would say, get a really good trailer editor to advise you, to help you put together your trailer. The more compelling it is, the better, and that's a quality that's basically going to be obtained through a experienced trailer cutter.
We've got a bunch of hands up, and I want to give plenty of time for them, but a few more quick questions. Are they looking for shorts, and are they, are they far more interested in a limited series than a one-off feature documentary?
Yeah, that's a good question. Two good questions there. There was a period where shorts were hot, like about 4 years ago, and I know of a case where Netflix paid several $100,000 for an Oscar finalist short. I'm just not hearing that now. I'm hearing minor dollars for shorts. So the next question is, what's the most desirable length? Is it a one-off, like a TV special, or a theatrical length movie, or a series? And the big, their big budgets, their big swings are series, multi-episode, documentary series that involve unique access, often with the participation of the subject, whether it's Michael Jordan or Billie Eilish. So it's super celebrity access series. Or if it's crime, it could be a multi-part episode of a notorious person or a notorious kind of criminal event. But again, needing unique access, never told before point of view on an event that is a kind of a high point in popular culture, in the zeitgeist, in popular awareness, so that it's a pre-sold, in a way, a pre-sold topic.
Do they allow, if they come in, on a commission or an original, do they allow, if it's a feature length documentary, do they or a short, do they allow for festival, a festival window for the filmmakers, or does it, they pretty much want it to go right on Netflix?
I understand, actually, I don't know whether there's any change in the practice, but I understand that they do. So I would double check with other experts that are recently doing deals, but I understand that they do allow a festival window.
Yeah, I mean, they do want Oscars, so
Yeah,
they can't get it unless they do. So
yeah, they tend to, yeah, they do, and they tend to acquire, say, Sundance off for Sundance winners and Sundance finalists, right? Or for the very short list of other leading festivals like TIFF and such. They will acquire them off the festival, but then other projects that they have developed internally with the view of capturing an Oscar nomination or some other major award, they'll allow that window, theatrical window.
One last question, because, and I seem to be harping on this because I'm being clairvoyant. I can tell there's so many people out here who like do not have a sales agent, don't have a relationship with a producer who has a relationship with Netflix, and are somehow hoping to work a meeting, but they have an amazing story and a unique story, and they really believe in their story. So, um, if they are to, if they go the email route, they have I know you said they don't look at emails or consider emails. Um, let's say they've made contact somehow or other, met them briefly in the cab or whatever, and are following up. What do you send ahead of time of a meeting, or what would you send to try and get a pitch meeting? Is it the short, I mean, I would rarely encourage people to send a trailer or a sizzle or something in a cold email, or even a follow-up. What would you do to get that meeting, perhaps?
Well, there's two questions. You said you've already met them in the cab, and then you're
Or you
following
said
up. So,
you said you
right?
can't cold email them, but
Yeah, I don't. So don't. I just think the chances of success cold emailing a Netflix executive from their list, you get their name, Jane blogs at netflix.com, writing them a letter. You never get the chances of you hearing them from them again, unless you have an absolutely explosive, email line and their subject line and their administrative assistant just
right.
somehow it pops. I mean, I just think the chances
Answer
are
me or
so
I'll kill
small.
myself. Yes.
The chances are so small. But if you do get a meeting, it returns back to this: what are you going to present? You do need a sizzle, a really compelling sizzle, and you need to have that PowerPoint that summarizes the story, and you just have to be incredibly well rehearsed in how you pitch it. What are the unique, never seen before qualities about this story to which you have unique access, and you have an extraordinary ability to tell a story, and you have really excellent creative partners on your team.
And the reason for a 3 to 4 minute video is because you can never assume they're going to see it ahead of time. So
Yeah, I wouldn't send it ahead of time, and I wouldn't say 3 to 4. I'd say 2 to 3 anyway for the trailer. And then the next step, they might, if you've developed the story fully and you're not known to them, they might ask you for what I call a presentation tape, which is a 10-minute, 8-minute sequence of the film that you've assembled. It's an edited assembly that shows the character of the film.
right.
Back in the day with people would pitch during that period of booming reality and character-based television that the channels went through. People were pitching kind of unique characters to build a TV set, to build a TV show out of a sequence on an iPhone. It was a question: does the character really pop? So if it's character-based, it's just the video that actually demonstrates that character is just going to create irresistible viewing. And I think that's really important in your trailer if it's a character-based series. A character-based story.